and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A cabinet away day. Are things so fractured within the Conservative Party that they need a trip to Chequers to thrash things out? Well, today we explore what on earth is going on that private residence for the Prime Minister. Also, tanks are now not only being sent to Ukraine by the United Kingdom, but the US and Germany has agreed to release them too. What difference could this make for the war on our doorsteps? Well, we'll explore all of that after the headlines.
Good morning, it's just gone 9:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's president says the quick delivery of Western tanks is urgently needed in its fight against Russia. Volodymyr Zelensky's comments come after the US agreed to send 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and Germany announced they'd send 31 Abrams. That's to add to the UK's 14 Challenger tanks. In his nightly address, President Zelensky also urged the West to send long-range missiles and fighter jets.
The more defence support our heroes at the front receive from the world, the sooner Russia's aggression will end, and the more reliable the security guarantees for Ukraine and all our partners will be after the war. The terrorist state must lose, people's right to life must be protected, and so it will be.
Over 100 charities are calling on the Prime Minister to open an independent inquiry after 200 child refugees were found to be missing from Home Office hotels. They're warning children are at risk of exploitation, describing the situation as a scandal. The charities are calling on the government to place the children with specialist local authority teams rather than in hotels. The Immigration Minister told MPs 13 out of those 200 children who remain missing are under 16. Royal Mail says recent strike action has cost the postal firm over £200 million. The dispute with the Communication Workers Union has led to 18 days of walkouts since August. Meanwhile, the group says the number of voluntary redundancies will be significantly lower than the 10,000 originally suggested. And Meta says Donald Trump will be allowed back on Facebook and Instagram in the coming weeks. The former US president's social media accounts were suspended for 2 years following the Capitol riot in 2021. The company says it's put new guardrails in place to deter repeat offences. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:34 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, this morning, Cabinet Ministers are having an away day. Yes, they're off on a school trip of sorts, to Chequers. I'm assured it will not be including team-building exercises, sitting in circles on the floor or throwing beanbags at each other. No, instead, this is a two-part working day. First, a political cabinet, reportedly to be addressed by the election guru Isaac Levido. This is the man who ran the Tories' successful 2019 election campaign, the man who led the Conservative Party to that historic 80-seat majority through message discipline. What messages might he be giving to the political cabinet that is taking place in the first part of this Chequers away day? Well, following that, there'll be Cabinet proper. Now, within this Cabinet proper, 5 key priorities will be addressed by the Prime Minister. The 5, of course, that he set out at the start of the year. Not only controlling inflation, but also looking at growth, looking at bringing down debt, controlling and stopping those boats, and, of course, waiting lists. Those are the 5 priorities of the Prime Minister that will be discussed in Cabinet proper. I understand not finishing until around 7 p.m. this evening, after which Cabinet Ministers will slink back to London or indeed their constituencies. Well, we'll be talking more about this Cabinet away day. What on earth might have inspired the need for these Cabinet Ministers to get out of Westminster? Why do they need to crack their heads together in the Prime Minister's official residence elsewhere? Well, we'll explore that in just a moment. But for now, another Mark White exclusive. GB News can exclusively reveal that the plainclothes members of the military have been patrolling some of Kent's beaches on the lookout for those small migrant boats that managed to make it past Border Force and Royal Naval patrols in the Channel. It comes as almost 500 migrants were taken to Dover on Wednesday after taking advantage of a break in the weather to make that crossing. Hundreds more attempted to cross but failed to make it to our UK waters. And our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has this report.
Just before first light, the Border Force vessel Volunteer slipped into Dover Harbour. On board, around 100 people taken off 2 small migrant boats. During weeks of winter storms, there have been few in the way of weather windows where conditions are calm enough to allow small boats to cross. But the criminal gangs are patient, and after operating for the past 4 years, they're now expert at reading the wind and the tides. So on the few occasions the weather allows, the people smugglers launch their small boats en masse. By mid-morning, around 300 Channel migrants had been taken to Kent after they were picked up from half a dozen inflatables. The Prime Minister has vowed to make tackling the small boats crisis a top priority. The bad weather of late, meaning relatively low numbers arriving here, has certainly eased the pressure on the government. But as this latest surge shows, the moment weather conditions improve, the boats are back. As we filmed, military personnel left Dover Harbour in 2 rigid inflatables to patrol some of Kent's beaches, looking for any small boats that might have made it past the Border Force and Navy vessels out in the Channel. GB News has been told that other members of the military are now routinely patrolling some beaches on foot as well. Into the afternoon, the boats kept coming, just before the weather window closed again, with windy conditions now expected until the weekend. In just a matter of days, Border Force will once again take control of Channel migrant operations from the military, who've been coordinating these patrols since last April. But the pressure on the government is unlikely to ease just because the authorities are better at spotting and intercepting small boats. Stopping the trade in Channel migrants is the ultimate goal, but even the government admits that won't be a quick or simple job.
Well, that report, of course, was from Mark White, who joins me now, live from Dover. Mark, this seems to be a story that just continues to run, and many people watching will feel sort of an impotence of this country. We can patrol beaches, we can look out for boats, but ultimately the boats still arrive on our beaches, and there are still all of these international obligations to then process the people on them. Do patrols on these beaches actually make any difference at all?
Well, they make a difference in the sense that any boat that manages to get through the Border Force patrol boats and the Royal Navy out there in the Channel and then land on beaches, the chances of them running off into the local community and then meeting up with their contacts wherever that might be are lessened a bit, so that must be welcome, because we know there were several worrying incidents last year where boats landed on beaches. Some of those on board made their way into the homes of individuals demanding a lift to locations or a use of a mobile phone and the like. So clearly it seems part of what Rishi Sunak was saying about a tougher and more efficient approach to the way in which they control the boats coming across. But yes, there is a fundamental issue. You can be more efficient at detecting the boats and stopping the people, but then of course they're brought into the asylum system, and we still have the significant problem of dealing last year with almost 46,000 people. It's what you do really on the other side of the Channel to break up these criminal gangs. Now, Labour, interestingly, have put out new analysis this morning, Tom, in which they've calculated that the criminal gangs made £183 million from the trade in cross-channel migrants last year, because it's about between £3,000 and £5,000 to get onto one of these boats, so an average of £4,000, and that they calculate was £183 million to the criminal gangs, which of course makes it highly lucrative for them. So trying to tackle that, trying to dismantle them is difficult, because there will always be people willing to step in and take their place.
And yet the Labour Party isn't offering much difference when it comes to policy. They're saying they'd fund these processors here in the United Kingdom to a greater degree. They'd try and crack down on gangs overseas. They're not pretty descriptive about how they would do that. Is there any big difference between how these problems have been dealt with hitherto and what the Labour Party policy is today?
Well, one thing that Labour say they want to concentrate on is actually disrupting the people trafficking model on the continent. So to that end, they would boost the National Crime Agency task force dealing with these people smugglers, an additional 100 officers, they say, which they believe could make a significant difference. Whether it would or not, I think you probably need more than that, but they would be working in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, all of these places where, of course, these people smugglers are operating. They have had some successes, to be fair to them, but it's such a huge problem. And at £183 million a year, you can see that for every criminal gang or member of a criminal gang you take down, plenty of others will be willing to step into the breach and do that job.
Like a very vicious, venomous hydra, the heads keep springing up. Mark White, thank you so much for your latest analysis there, that exclusive story on those patrols as well for us this morning. Well, moving back to what on earth is going on in Westminster, we've got some new polling commissioned by GBNews of the entire British population to show the state of the parties. Now, let's have a look at that voting intention. The Conservative Party sit on 21%, according to the latest GBNews People's poll, just 1 in 5 backing the Conservatives. That is compared to 1 in 2, 50% backing the Labour Party, a pretty astonishing difference there, an almost 30-point gulf between the main parties there. That would deliver a seismic majority for the Labour Party. Now, why might that be? Well, when we dive into the detail and ask about who is best placed to manage the economy, the British public say that a Labour government with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, almost twice as many view that potential scenario as a more competent as a better option to manage the economy than those who believe a Conservative government with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister would be. Clearly a lot for the Conservative Party to talk about today, clearly a lot for those cabinet ministers sitting in Chequers to discuss. Let's get stuck into it all now with Sam Lister, the political editor of the Daily Express. Sam, first of all, this is pretty stark and it hasn't really budged. The polling hasn't really budged since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. Do you think Conservative MPs will be surprised by that?
I think if you speak to even Conservative MPs who are very keenly in support of Rishi Sunak, who think he is the right man for the job, even they don't really think they've got much of a chance of winning at the next election. But what is interesting is that today they've got this Chequers away day. The cabinet, Rishi Sunak is gathering his cabinet together at Chequers to take them out of the fray from Westminster, to sit down and really have in-depth chats about the state of the government and the path to the next election. And he's bringing in his election guru, Isaac Levido, to talk about how they can possibly kind of at least just hold on. And he is apparently said to believe there is a narrow path to victory for the Conservatives, because even though the Labour Party and Keir Starmer are doing far, far better in the polls, we're still 2 years out in effect. And actually, there's no real love for Keir Starmer. It's more that people are turning away from the Conservatives. So he thinks that there is actually still a chance for the Conservatives to win next time round.
That's really interesting, that to some extent people are defaulting for the Labour Party rather than flocking to the Labour Party. Perhaps it's been a clever strategy of Labour to seem very, very bland, to seem like they're not particularly exciting, and therefore they sort of become that status quo that people may well feel more comfortable to default for. I suppose there's a risk in that, though. Perhaps this is what Isaac Levido is saying, that this is sort of support for the Labour Party that is very broad at the moment, but fairly shallow.
Yeah, that's it. And I think you're right that the Labour Party certainly does have a kind of don't frighten the horses strategy. And actually, let's just kind of keep things calm. Let's not go too radical on things. And people who are fed up with the Conservatives will turn back to us. Now, actually, if you talk to people in the Red Wall who voted for Boris Johnson last time round, they don't immediately feel that kind of love and desire to vote for Keir Starmer, because there's still a lot of suspicion around his views on Brexit. And so those people are still up for grabs, but they're not really loving the Conservatives either. And the danger is obviously these people may just stay at home. But, you know, I think that is the thing, isn't it? Who are you targeting your strategy at next time round? If you're the Conservative Party, is it those Red Wallers, or is it those in the south who the Lib Dems are going to try and make hay down in the southwest and parts of the home counties? So it's quite a difficult strategy to reach both those groups of people at the same time.
Interestingly, looking at Boris Johnson, the Outer London MP, he seems to be much more connecting with those Red Wall voters, whereas the North Yorkshire MP, Rishi Sunak, seems to be connecting much more with those voters down in the south. By choosing Rishi Sunak, has the Conservative Party basically given up on the Red Wall? Are they thinking that perhaps they really need to save Surrey rather than looking at the Tees Valley?
I would say they definitely don't. They would never say they've given up on the Red Wall.
Oh, well, Sam Lister appears to have just dropped out there. We'll see if we can get her back later in the programme. But for now, we do have more stories to get to. Because, of course, as I was mentioning earlier, Germany and the United States have now followed Britain's lead in committing to send tanks to Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Zelensky has hailed it as a historic day, following weeks of intense international pressure, particularly on Berlin, to commit to the move. Last night, on a call with the leaders of the US, Germany, France and Italy, Rishi Sunak urged Western countries to give more support to Ukraine and push for an end to this war. Well, let's cross live to Ukraine now, speak to a member of the Ukrainian parliament, Kira Rudik, who joins us now live from Kiev. Kira, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I suppose it is better late than never that particularly Germany commit to sending these tanks. Do you have any understanding of why they were taking so long to agree to this move?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Well, of course, we are all thrilled that the decision has finally been made and that we will receive tanks, and we will try to make everything possible and impossible from our side, so we will train our soldiers faster, and that logistically tanks will arrive to Ukraine faster. However, of course, it is upsetting that these decisions still take long. We hoped that the turning point in supplying weapons for Ukraine was before the New Year's, when President Biden agreed to send us Patriot missiles. We know that Germany was hesitant because they did not want to be the only one country supplying tanks to Ukraine. However, these arguments have been quickly ruled out when United Kingdom, United States, Poland agreed to do that. In fact, we never have heard decent explanations from Germany, like why hesitations. And I think as of right now, with the information from intelligences from all over the world, knowing that Russia will be on the offense very soon, it should not be a matter of question to give us weapons or not. Even right now, a year into this war, we are still in this David versus Goliath situation, where Russia has more people, more weapons, more military production, more supplies. So we have to be different. We have to fight harder. We have to have more sophisticated weapons, and we have to use different strategies. And having tanks is one of those strategies. Honestly, we are really happy that tanks would arrive, but why they did not arrive earlier from Germany, that would remain a big question mark.
It is a big question mark and a big concern, particularly because Germany wasn't just not sending its own tanks, it was refusing to allow Poland to send those Leopard 2 tanks as well. Are you worried that there might be a bit of a division in the Western alliance? Sort of, you've got America and the United Kingdom that are very steadfastly supporting Ukraine. Also, countries like those Baltic states and indeed Poland, those Eastern European countries, very strong in support of Ukraine. Do you worry that Germany and France are lagging in that support?
You see, Putin was very clear a couple of times that he plans to drag the war for a long time, and that he hopes that the Western alliance would not hold still till this time, that it will be really hard, and at some point the alliance will break. So, of course, we are worried that he may succeed, but again, it's in our power, in all democratic countries' power, to make him fail. Because what nobody is talking about is what would happen if Ukraine fails? Well, we don't want to think about that. We will be standing for as long as it takes. However, what would happen if we don't get the supplies? What will happen if the West will show its weakness against Putin? It's not only Ukraine, Russia, and the Western countries are watching. It's China watching. It's India watching. It's South American countries watching. Africa is watching, looking for a single small sign of weakness for all the rest dictators in the world to raise their heads and say, yeah, well, probably we can do something against the UN Charter as well. And so what would you do, Western countries? So I think this understanding that it's much more than Ukraine at stake is something that we need to continue telling our German friends, our French friends, and continue pushing for this unified front. This is the only way to move forward.
Yes, and I suppose very good news that even belatedly the Germans did get on board late last night. Kira Rudik, thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Always appreciate your contribution and your thoughts. And Slava Ukraini. Now, finally, back to domestic politics this morning. I'm joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and to checkers. We know in the past that summits at the Prime Minister's official country residence have altered the course of British history. But Darren, I suppose today we're not expecting a sort of seismic intervention as was decided at the in the midst of Theresa May's prime ministership. What can we expect today?
Yeah, hopefully we're not going to see this meeting in Chequers, Tom, change the course of history. That would be quite something, wouldn't it? You never know with politics, do you? Let's look at what's going to happen. We're going to see the cabinet gather there today. There's going to be a political cabinet, i.e. looking at the politics of the Conservative Party. We know they're going to be briefed on the possibilities around the next general election, how well or indeed how badly they may well do. We're told there's going to be a frank assessment of the Conservatives' position in the polls, and it's not looking good. There's one poll out today suggesting they are just on 22 points, way behind Labour, who shot up to 50 points in the polls. In fact, actually, that's been pretty consistent now, really, since the Liz Truss era. Rishi Sunak hasn't really shifted the polls by any great margin at all. And then we're going to see actual cabinet. Well, they'll talk about lots of the big issues today. I'm sure Ukraine may well pop up there. And we are going to also have a clip, an interview, if you like, from the broadcasters with the Prime Minister. And one of the questions going to be, there is no doubt that Nadhim Zahawi, I suspect, will dominate that form of questioning. He is going to be at that away day in Chequers today. It comes as many of his colleagues, either behind the scenes or increasingly in open, are saying that he should stand aside while this investigation is carried out. There's just a feeling that the weight of evidence is too great, that he's doing the party too much damage. And we're told, according to the Times this morning, Tom, that the Prime Minister is livid with Nadhim Zahawi, so much that he hasn't spoken to him in days.
Yes, the Prime Minister's spokesman yesterday was not committing to say whether or not the Prime Minister had spoken to Zahawi directly since he was appointed to the cabinet. He's saying that he wouldn't get into these private conversations. It's extraordinary, potentially, this level of animosity. Is this why they need an away day?
Sorry, I missed the last little bit of that, Tom. Is this why?
Is this why they need an away day? Is this a team-building exercise? Are we going to see people sitting around in a circle singing songs?
Well, do you remember, I think, wasn't it Steve Hilton working under David Cameron was coming up with all sorts of plans that ministers could do on away day? No, I think this will be a bit more suited and booted around the table, if you like. But yeah, I think there is a sense that, the cabinet collectively don't spend that much time together, do they? I mean, cabinet meetings are incredibly short these days. They last for 45 minutes, an hour at most, normally on a Tuesday morning. So collectively, the cabinet's actually not together very much. And yes, I think there has to be a sense that, spending time together is a way of trying to boost group morale. But it would be quite incredible if things are as bad as they are reported to be between the chairman of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister. And it does get to this sense, as you say, where the Prime Minister feels that he's been increasingly dragged into this row as well. It's interesting, last night, Downing Street felt the need to issue that statement, making it clear that the Prime Minister had never been fined by HMRC. He will not want this dragging on, but effectively that is what's going to happen until either this investigation concludes, and we really don't know how long that's going to last, or whether the Prime Minister feels fit, or indeed, as the critics would claim, strong enough to sack the chairman of the Conservative Party.
Really interesting stuff. Perhaps the Prime Minister's backed himself into a corner by sticking with that investigation. Darren, thank you for joining us here from Westminster. That's it from us today. Join us again tomorrow morning at 9:30 for another thrilling instalment into what's going on in British politics. Up next, though, is Bev Turner Today.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
Hello, Father.